Yo, what is going on? Thank you so much for joining in. So, you are interested in either starting the sci-fi or fantasy genre. Well, you've come to the right place because today I'm going to be going over my top 10 recommendations for books to get started in either the science fiction or fantasy genre. And a quick note too, all the books I'm going to go over, they are all a part of an ongoing or completed series. So if you do wind up picking one of these up, you have some more juicy reading ahead of you. So if you're ready, let's dive into it and check out these books. Alright, book number one is going to be Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Red Rising is book number one in an ongoing series set within the sci-fi genre. The first book is action-packed, thought-provoking, and continually gets better every iteration into the series. So what is Red Rising all about? Well, we actually follow a main character, a lowly miner, who infiltrates the ranks of gods and elites in order to enact revenge for the horrific wrongdoings done to him, his family, and his people that spans our solar system. This book has fantastic character development, a plot of unjust oppression, and a caste system, an academy setting as well, and crazy action scenes that get your adrenaline pumping while reading it. New word, adrenaline. When you're reading this book, your adrenaline just spikes to the roof. There is so much adrenaline in this book. There are so many moments where you just turning the page as fast as you can, trying to figure out what is going to happen next. However, I will tell you though, when I first started the series, I first started the book, it was giving me a vibe of the Hunger Games just because of this caste system and the way it was described, but that was quickly squashed into a thrilling story that I could not put down. You might also see online as well is that Red Rising is thought to be the weakest entry into the series, and I also agree with that, but with Red Rising already being a fantastic book, you're only going to go exponentially up from here. And looking at Goodreads as well, it looks like Red Rising is currently sitting at a 4.26 with over 350,000 ratings, so this might be a safe bet if you're just starting out into the sci-fi genre. And that is book number one. Alright, so what is book number two? That's going to be Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This book takes place in the sci-fi genre in the 23rd century within our solar system, so not too far from where we are today. It is a completed series, and it has a ton of crazy action, realistic space maneuvering, political maneuvering, mystery, horror, and a whole bunch of humor that ties it all together to make a really fun, fantastic read. So what is Leviathan Wakes all about? Well, we start out with following a group of ice cargo haulers who winds up in the middle of a large conspiracy that threatens war across the solar system, while at the same time following a detective who is on the hunt searching for a missing girl who also finds himself into something larger than expected. I really enjoyed this story. I literally laughed out loud in multiple scenes just because the dialogue in this book is top notch to where it feels realistic, it feels very immersive, especially between the banter on a few characters. It's just comical to read through. While crazy stuff is happening around them, the banter between them is just so immersive, it makes you just want to keep reading it and wanting more of it. So it's a very fast-paced story while setting up intricate and detailed world-building elements that sets up many books to come. And there's also a TV adaptation that's currently on Amazon right now that I hear is really good. I'm looking at Leviathan Wakes on Goodreads. It's currently sitting at a 4.29 with close to 250,000 ratings. So another safe bet when starting into the sci-fi genre. Alright, book number three is going to be Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne in an ongoing series, with this being our first fantasy book on this list. So this is the first in an ongoing series called the Bloodsworn Saga. And this is actually the only series that I've read so far by Mr. Gwynne. And I gotta say, after reading the first two books in this series, I'm definitely going to continue reading more of his work just because these two were so much fun to get through and really immersive. So the cover alone of this book is what really drew me in. Just look at this thing. I think this definitely wins Best Cover of the Year award whenever this book was released or published, because this cover just looks freaking epic. So what is Shadow of the Gods all about? Well, it's a Norse-inspired epic tale of us following three characters on their unique path to either save family while enacting revenge, or proving themselves and their superiors around them, or getting out of enslavement surrounded by Norse-inspired mythology. The series is really easy to dive into and get quickly immersed just because the characters are deeply explored within this novel, where you get to see the motivations and the extent of what they will actually do in order to succeed. We have kings, queens, jarls, magic, dragon, gods, and so much more within the Norse-inspired mythology, all explored within this book that keeps you engaged the entire read. And then looking at Shadow of the Gods right now on Goodreads, is sitting at a 4.26 with over 30,000 ratings, so a very safe bet when exploring the fantasy genre. And that is book number 3. Book number 4, we're going back into the sci-fi realm real quick, with book number 4 being Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio. So Empire of Silence is actually the first in the ongoing series called the Sun Eater series, with this being book number 1. So what is Empire of Silence all about? Well, we actually start off with learning about our main character, Hadrian Marlowe, where humans have spread across the galaxy, far, far into the future, where we're actually in a ongoing losing war with a horrific alien race called the Cielson. So Empire of Silence and the Sun Eater series as a whole is my favorite series at this point, just because there's so many jaw-dropping, action-packed moments that just keep you so immersed in the story, ingrained into your brain, and also the writing style that Christopher Rocchio uses within his story. It reads like poetry to where it's just so beautiful. Like, have you ever come across a book before? You read a sentence, and you actually have to put the book down just because of how beautiful that sentence was written. You have to go back to it, reread it again, and say, damn, that was written beautifully. Well, that happens multiple times in this book. So the book actually starts off with you learning about the end of the series, and I know that might sway some people away, because why would you read a book when you already know what's going to happen in the end? Well, I'll tell you what, journey before destination, and the journey itself is a compelling, action-packed story of just mystery, incredible world building, fantastic ideas, great character development, with each book building on the previous installment of it just becoming better and better every entry into the series. And similar to what I was saying about Red Rising in terms of that book being the weakest entry into the series, Empire of Silence fits that similar mold, because each book after that just gets better and better and better, with book 2 stepping that up tenfold. So the whole Sun Eater series and Empire of Silence, I highly, highly recommend it, just because there's so many things to love and appreciate from this book, with it having so many elements from both science fiction and fantasy, that I think it's a good blend of both. And looking at it as well on Goodreads, it's currently sitting at a 4.03 with about 7,500 ratings. And that is book number 4. Alright, book number 5 is going to be The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. So this is an ongoing series that has me so excited for the next installment, with 2 books being out so far. This is an African-inspired epic tale of revenge and the extent that people will go to in order to get that revenge. It starts off really strong with a crazy action-packed prologue that gets you immersed into this epic world of just chaos and war. And in this story, we follow a character named Tao as he's navigating this unjust and unforgiving world of a caste system where he is at the bottom of the totem pole. Tragedy is brought upon him and his family, where he then dedicates the remainder of his life to becoming the best swordsman the world has ever seen, becoming an unstoppable force in a world that underestimates lessers and his kind. The story, it has you rooting for the main character so hard that you need to see him succeed, with action scenes that have so much adrenaline that it gets your heart pumping because you need to see what's going to happen next. It's that immersive and intense. Also, it has incredible world building, an intriguing magic system, dragons of course, dual wielding sword action, and a plot that keeps you engaged from beginning to end. I also have to say the audiobook of this story is incredible because the narrator really brings to life the characters within the story and makes you feel like you're in the war and the chaos with the main character Tao. And looking at Rage of Dragons right now on Goodreads, it's sitting at a 4.31 with about 30,000 ratings, so a really safe bet for diving into the fantasy genre. And that was book number 5. Alright, book number 6 is going to be The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. And some of you who might be watching this already that have already dived into the fantasy genre, you probably knew Brandon Sanderson was going to be on this list just because of how huge he's become within the genre. Yeah, if you've ever glimpsed the fantasy genre in a bookstore or even browsing Amazon, you've most likely seen a Brandon Sanderson story within that list or on the shelves. For a good reason why is that Way of Kings and his other works are just becoming the cornerstone in the fantasy genre. So what is the Way of Kings all about? And this is the first story in an ongoing series called the Stormlight Archives. With this book just being right over 1,000 pages, this is the embodiment of the word epic. This story is set in a world called Roshar, where humans are at war with a thought to be lesser being, where we follow three main characters on their unique story that all intertwines as they struggle for power, magic, and the fate of the world. The world building and attention to detail in this story is put to the absolute max, making Roshar feel like a living, breathing place that you are visiting within this story while being with the main characters. But you have to watch out for these storms. Oh yeah, did I mention that there is an ongoing revolving storm that roams the world every so often, causing mass destruction, while at the same time empowering light, currency, and magic. The POVs and characters within the story are fully fleshed out, where you feel and get to understand each of their backgrounds and upbringings as you get to understand their actions and their decisions while seeing them grow throughout the story. I feel that almost anyone who visits the fantasy genre needs to pick up The Way of Kings at some point, with it becoming a cornerstone in the fantasy genre. And looking at The Way of Kings right now on Goodreads, it's currently sitting at a 4.65 with over 460,000 ratings. So I know the page count might seem a little daunting, but the payoff is so worth it. This is a great option if you're just starting out in the fantasy genre. Alright, book number 7 is going to be Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. So this is actually a self-published book in an ongoing series called The Bound and the Broken. So what is the story all about? Well, we follow three main characters as they enter the Proving, which is a test of courage and bravery, but ends up in the middle of a long-raging war of bloodshed, magic, dragons, and violence, and evil forces. We follow multiple characters within the story and different POVs as they struggle with rising questions on what to do next with this whirlwind of history coming back into fruition of ancient bonds being reforged. This story has a ton of fantasy elements and tropes that you would expect to find within a fantasy book or a setting. Dragons, elves, dwarves, mages, and the story revolving around three guys, three boys, in a small town village who wind up on an epic quest. While these might be traditionally found in a fantasy element, Cahill puts a nice modern twist on it, feeling as though the story is fresh, especially if you're coming into this brand new, very first fantasy book. This is a great option as it will feel like it was written recently, because it was. The world building is fleshed out with hundreds of years of history and context that allows you to get immersed into the world. The action scenes are executed perfectly, where you get to see this vivid descriptions of all the cinematic scenes unfolding within your head. There's a ton to appreciate and take away from this book. It looks like Of Blood and Fire is currently sitting at a 4.16 right now on Goodreads, with a little over 6,000 ratings. And something else to note as well is that if you can also read his novella, which takes place before Of Blood and Fire, and it's about 78 pages of just pure action that is just so much fun to read. This is one of my favorite novellas I've read so far, and you can definitely read this first before diving into the full-on novel, which is more of like a slow burn where you get to learn about the world and the characters, over time, or this one you're just dropped into the action immediately. So overall, either of these books would be a great option if you're just starting out into the fantasy genre. With that being book number 7. Alright, we're going back into the sci-fi side of things with book number 8 being Hyperion. So Hyperion is currently my favorite book of all time for many reasons why, which we'll get into here pretty soon. But what is this story all about? Well, we actually follow 7 pilgrims as they're on their journey to Hyperion in the hopes to find an answer that will help determine the fate of humanity. And on this journey to Hyperion, each of the pilgrims share their own unique tale on how and why they're on this journey in the first place. So essentially in this book you have 6 distinct and unique stories with its own writing style that all intertwine and interweave together, culminating to an epic end sequence. And as these 6 stories are converging together, as they're on their way to Hyperion, there is this ever-looming metal-spiked creature called the Shrike that has red eyes, metal spikes everywhere, with it just being looming in their minds and its purpose being unknown. So again, with this book essentially having 6 unique stories, you get to have different elements of not just sci-fi, but also mystery, horror, religious exploration, and more, all told from different characters that feel fully fleshed out. The writing style, it feels grounded while at the same time introducing grandiose ideas that just stick with you way past finishing the book. With one of my favorite ideas being this crazy huge tree that's capable of space travel that all the pilgrims are traveling on in order to get to the planet Hyperion. I will tell you though that Hyperion for me was a little bit hard to get into just because the first story is told in a journal or a diary perspective where each day is recounted upon, and it just took a little bit to get into, but the payoff towards the end was so worth it, with a crazy jaw-dropping moment that I still remember today. And in this book, you go from moments of just sheer chaos to the next page of just having tear-wrenching scenes of beauty. I love this book, and I can't wait to read it again and again and again. And looking at it on Goodreads, it's currently sitting at a 4.26 with over 230,000 ratings. So a great first book just to dive into if you're starting out in the sci-fi or fantasy genre, just because there's so many stories within this one book, there is going to be something in here for you. And that is book number 8. So book number 9, we're still on the sci-fi side of things, with this book being Dune by Frank Herbert. So when you think of science fiction, Dune probably comes to mind for a really good reason. Dune is one of the most influential and well-known books in the sci-fi genre, selling well over 20 million copies. So what's the story about? So Dune is set in the far, far future where families and noble houses control planets and the resources found within that planet, with one in particular being melange, or the spice that holds immense power. And within the story, we follow a character named Paul Atreides, where his family takes control of a desert planet called Arrakis, where the spice melange can be found. Paul's journey involves deep political intrigue, desert survival, and prophetic destiny as he gets involved in the middle and control of Arrakis, with deep themes of prophecy, religion, power, and ecology. There are so many books that pull inspiration from Dune just because of the sheer amount of ideas that Herbert intertwined within this epic story and immersive writing style of Dune. Dune would be a great first choice for anyone starting out in the sci-fi genre, as there's just so many elements to appreciate within this book, while also enjoying a very fun and compelling story. And looking at Dune on Goodreads, it's currently sitting at a 4.26 with over 1.2 million ratings. And that is book number 9. Alright, last book on our list. You probably saw this one coming, and that is going to be A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. So Game of Thrones is iconic for many reasons, with number 1 being that the series is thought to be some of the best books ever written in the fantasy genre. Number 2 being that it was adapted to the HBO series called Game of Thrones, which performed super strong early on, but felt underwhelming towards the tail end of the series, and underwhelming is an understatement. And number 3 is that the story is unfinished. The last book that came out was written in 2011. But going back to Game of Thrones, this is a story that packs a punch with fantastic story building, immersive world building, complex and deep characters, and cinematic action scenes that keeps you engaged the entire read. The action scenes and political maneuvering found within this book is written masterfully, with George R. R. Martin bringing the characters to life, with each one feeling unique and getting you fully invested into each of these characters. Also, there's just this looming dark force that's overshadowing all the little squabbles that you see within the story of political maneuvering and conniving schemes that just keeps you up tonight with this crazy mystery of what's going to happen. Even though we don't know when the next book is going to come out, I still recommend it, as there's just so many great elements to be found within this book that is just iconic to the fantasy genre. And A Game of Thrones is currently sitting at a 4.44 with over 2.3 million ratings on Goodreads. So another great option to start in the fantasy genre. And there we have it. We have 10 books that I personally recommend out of all the books that I have read to get started in either the science fiction or fantasy genre. And if there's a book on here that you expected to see, I might have not read it just yet. So let me know down below, what books did you expect to see on this list that you think would be a great first read for anyone starting off in their journey within these genres. And before we go, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and like this video. It would help out a lot. And just for staying around this long, you've earned 2 XP tokens. Here you go. And thanks again. Have a good one. Peace.